Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. Well, former special counsel Jack Smith faced what I would call blistering scrutiny on Capitol Hill this week as Republicans exposed the gross extra-constitutional abuse of power aimed squarely at President Donald Trump and his family. Not everyone will remember this, but while Joe Biden was still president, but there was growing evidence of his infirmities and the fact that he didn't seem to know where he was or what he was doing on any given day. He was asked point blank by a reporter, aren't you worried about a rematch with Donald Trump? And he kind of smirked and said, no, we're not going to let him run. And there you have it. Joe Biden and his Justice Department launched Operation Arctic Frost. This makes Watergate look like small potatoes. This is the use of the full authority of the judicial section of government, plus our intelligence agencies, to basically remove, or in this case, block a candidate for president for strictly political reasons, highly illegal and unconstitutional. House Judiciary Committee Jim Jordan opened the hearings by revisiting the FBI's unprecedented 2020 raid on Trump's Mar-a-Lago home, an operation that, according to testimony from FBI officials themselves today, ignored standard protocol. In other words, FBI officials both in the Washington and the Miami offices, because the three southern counties of Florida are under the jurisdiction of the FBI office in Miami, all recommended against it. This sounds familiar. Some of those same people thought that raiding my home at 6 o'clock in the morning to arrest me for the first time nonviolent crime of allegedly lying under oath to Congress was a little excessive. In my case, very much like Trump's case, they came in with overwhelming force. They did have a shoot-to-kill order, interestingly enough, and they rummaged through Melania Trump's underwear drawer, just as they rummaged through my wife's drawer. Chairman Jordan revealed that they also searched first son Barron Trump's bedroom, along with First Lady Melania Trump's personal belongings, despite, again, the internal FBI recommendations to notify Trump's legal team beforehand, which, of course, they had not done. Those recommendations were reportedly rejected by Biden's hyper-politicized Department of Justice. Jordan further noted that just 3 years after Trump announced his 2024 presidential comeback bid, Attorney General Merrick Garland appointed Jack Smith, bringing him back from The Hague as a special counsel. Jack Smith had worked decades ago with Andrew Weissman in Brooklyn, equally corrupt. There are still pending allegations against Jack Smith taking bribes in his role at The Hague that the Justice Department has never adjudicated. But it's not lost on me that that Attorney General Merrick Garland almost immediately then staffed his team at the DOJ with people directly tied to the controversial raid on Trump's home. Jordan's testimony made it abundantly clear at this hearing that law enforcement under Smith's direction was weaponized against a political opponent. Smith's testimony actually only continued to make the case. So when asked about President Trump's 2025 pardons of January 6 defendants, Smith abandoned any prosecutorial or legal restraint, openly speculating that those pardoned would commit future crimes. The comments right there demonstrate Smith's deep partisan underpinnings and a lack of objectivity on the question of President Trump and his supporters. And it was Jack Smith and his cohorts who came up with the completely baseless claim that during an election dispute, when state election returns are disputed, and that dispute is headed to the courts, that the forming of an alternative slate for the Electoral College by a certain deadline is not a crime. But Rudy Giuliani and a number of others still remain charged in Arizona and in Nevada for participating in an alternative elector slate. Internal elector slates to the Electoral College are formed to preserve your rights in the event that you are successful in court in overturning the election based on evidence and a trial. So for those out there, and you find them all the time, that will say, well, Trump's completely full of BS when he says the election was stolen because all of the legal challenges he brought were defeated. That's not true. In fact, none of the legal challenges brought by Mayor Giuliani and other attorneys on behalf of Donald Trump, they weren't rejected by the courts. They were not heard by the courts. The courts managed to not hear those cases, in every case based on some technicality. And then you have Attorney General Bill Barr. This is the same Bill Barr who, in an interview with Wolf Blitzer on CNN, said that mail-in ballots are an open invitation for widespread fraud. Yet when the U.S. Attorney in Philadelphia told Attorney General Bill Barr that he discovered hard evidence of voter fraud and election fraud in the Keystone State, he was told by Bill Barr to bury it and to do nothing. The highlight, perhaps, of today's hearing was when Congressman Troy Nehls was talking about January 6th and correctly laid responsibility for the events that day on the Capitol Hill Police and the Capitol Hill Police leadership, which allegedly failed to share intelligence warning of the coming unrest. President Trump, watching from abroad, called the hearing the unraveling of the Democrats' scam, accusing Trump of destroying lives under the guise of justice. But Michael Fanone, this is the crisis actor playing the role of a Capitol Hill police officer, openly today dropped the F-bomb, yelling F you at the Texas member of Congress and flipping him off. He had to be physically removed from the hearings. This entire thing boils down to a simple question, and that is whether we are going to see accountability and justice, or whether there are two different sets of rules, one for Republicans and one for Democrats. So when Peter Navarro, the president's trade advisor, member of the White House staff, gets a subpoena from the January 6th committee, and he refuses to appear and answer questions, he was arrested humiliatingly in public. He was tried and he was jailed. Now, Bill and Hillary Clinton have been sent a subpoena to answer questions about their relationship with Epstein and Epstein's financial relationship with the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Global Initiative, as well as their many trips to his island, and they refuse to testify. So will they be charged? Will they be arrested? Will they be incarcerated like an average citizen, or are there special rules for elites? By the way, I was subpoenaed to come appear before the January 6th committee, as was General Flynn. And we both chose to assert our Fifth Amendment rights not to answer questions. By the way, that does not mean that you did anything wrong. Does not mean you were guilty of a crime. Does not mean you have anything to hide. What it does mean is you're smart enough to know that the House Democrats will take what you say under oath and they will twist it into a process crime. So during my trial, I was asked, did you ever get an email from Steve Bannon? And I could remember. I said, I don't recall. And they said, you lied. You see, on this date, you got an email from Bannon. And I said, but that's a link to a story on the front page of that day's Washington Post. How could that email be material? How could it be relevant? How could it prove anything whatsoever? So there's a little question that in my case, Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell basically were shared all of my emails by the Mueller prosecutors so they could put together this gotcha list of questions. And although I readily admit I did make mistakes in my testimony, none of them were willful and none of them were material, meaning they covered no underlying crime. So I guess we're about to see, is there one standard of justice or is there two? The Clintons have a lot to answer for. There is some precedent. President Harry Truman refused to testify for House Republicans in the late 50s. I'm trying to research how that worked out. But these hearings that we are seeing right now, I think are desperately needed. But they must be followed up with prosecutions. Cannot be another Trey Gowdy-esque exercise in political theater. Jack Smith violated the Constitution and the law by spying on U.S. senators, spying on private citizens in violation of their Fourth Amendment rights. Their illegal surveillance alone is problematic. But then inventing this whole fake electors case is yet another example. I do remember Ari Melber, particularly unsavory character who's on MSNBC, demanding that I should be charged with crimes in Georgia in connection with the fake elector slate, which I really know nothing about, having not been to Georgia after the election. I couldn't tell you who was on the slate, but I do know in 1877 there were multiple alternative elector slates filed by Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and others. I also know in 1960 the Electoral College slate pledged to Vice President Richard Nixon was declared the winner on election night in Hawaii, but John Kennedy's campaign very wisely formed an alternative slate of electors because once the absentee ballots were counted, Jack Kennedy carried Hawaii, not Richard Nixon. So the idea that forming an alternative slate, whether it's in Nevada or Georgia or Arizona, is a crime, is a crock, to be quite clear. There's no question that after the Russian collusion hoax, the Jack Smith investigation, in which it's clear he was charged with Joe Biden and Merrick Garland and making sure that Donald Trump could not run again, and he was coordinating with Alvin Bragg and coordinating with Letitia James, the Manhattan District Attorney, the New York County District Attorney, and the New York State Attorney General, as well as coordinating with Fannie Wills in Georgia. She later to be disgraced and the cases there against Trump supporters dismissed. So there's a lot that has to happen here before we have full justice and accountability. The lunatics over the New York Times keep saying Trump is on a revenge tour. This is about retaliation. No, it's about holding those who broke the law and violated the constitutions in their manic effort to destroy Donald Trump accountable. They broke the law. Why should they not be prosecuted? And those Republicans who say, oh, if we're mean to them now, if and when they ever get back in power, they'll be really mean to us. Please, you already stormed my home at 6 o'clock in the morning. You already scared the daylights out of my wife. You've already terrorized and impoverished my family. So don't tell me about who did what to whom. When I see a punk like Hakeem Jeffries threatening that we're going to indict everyone we get in power, let's take a close look at Hakeem, shall we? Because I think these members of Congress who are now threatening that if they are held accountable, that they will somewhere downstream get even. This is, to me, an outrageous. Folks, they will try to destroy Donald Trump again if they get the opportunity. How do we know this? Because they tried to destroy him once before. I'm Roger Stone, and we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. I have to say that in my 50 years in American politics, I haven't seen anything nearly as chilling and as shocking as the video of this Black Lives Matter attack on a Christian worship service at the city's church in St. Paul, Minnesota. I honestly cannot believe that this happened in America. But there's strong evidence today that the Biden-era double standard on law and order is officially over. On Thursday, Attorney General Pam Bondi announced the arrest of Twin Cities activist Nakima Levy Armstrong for her alleged role in organizing the coordinated disruption of the Christian worship service at City's Church in St. Paul. According to Attorney General Bondi, Armstrong was taken into custody by the FBI at her direction after investigators determined that Armstrong played the key role in planning Sunday's protest, where activists stormed the church during Mass, chanted slogans, confronted clergy mid-service. I would remind you, this is one day after a Black Lives Matter spokeswoman called for the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul to burn. Her words, let's burn it all down. Another organizer, Chantel Louisa Allen, who's actually a sitting member of the St. Paul School Board and a leader of the Black Lives Matter Twin Cities, was also arrested, along with a far-left agitator named William Kelly, who did a viral TikTok post goading Attorney General Bondi to come get him. So she did. An indictment has also been filed against fake journalist Don Lemon, with a Democrat magistrate currently blocking those charges. I'm not sure how a federal magistrate blocks charges authorized by the Department of Justice, but Don Lemon, if he was interviewing people prior to their invasion of the church and knew they were invading the church and didn't report that to anybody, then that makes him an accessory. And as much as his career needs the boost, I do think that he too should be charged. I mean, if they say a lemon is a sour fruit. Bondi says, listen loud and clear, we will not tolerate attacks on places of worship. The protest targeted the city's church because one of its pastors also serves as an acting ICE field office director for Minnesota. Video footage shows demonstrators shouting inside the sanctuary and actually interrupting and completely disrupting the worship, which is a clear escalation from protest to intimidation. The event was organized by the Racial Justice Network, led by Armstrong. By the way, the names of these groups are always devised so they actually promote the exact opposite of what the name says. The incident sparked national outrage, as you would have expected, with President Trump calling the disruption horrible and directing the Justice Department to investigate. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed that both Armstrong and Allen have been charged under the federal FACE Act, which prohibits obstruction and intimidation of houses of worship. Interesting enough, this is the exact same law that Democrat and Biden Attorney General Merrick Garland used to harass, arrest, and prosecute Christians who went into houses of worship to pray outside the church against abortion. So for years, radical activists have been emboldened to harass churches, to silence Christians, and hide behind political causes without consequences. This week's arrests, I hope, I pray, send a long overdue message. The First Amendment protects religious freedom, not mob rule. Under President Trump's leadership, the rule of law is going to be restored, and America's houses of worship, whether it's a church or a synagogue or a mosque, will be protected from leftist threat. Meanwhile, President Trump has announced that he is that he is very serious about the Greenland deal, and we're going to talk about that when we come back right here in the Stone Zone.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
President Donald Trump, very serious about Greenland, announced yesterday that the United States has reached a framework for a future deal involving Greenland and the broader Arctic region, a move that demonstrates how President Trump's bold, aggressive America First approach to national security and global leadership actually yields dividends. I mean, think about this just for a moment. The idea of a European power still having a colony in our hemisphere is a pretty outdated idea. It's very clear that Denmark cannot afford to defend Greenland. The Danish cannot guarantee the security of Greenland. The Danish cannot even provide a better quality of life for those who live in Greenland. And the Greenland strategically is vitally important to the United States, given the huge uptick in both Chinese and Russian submarine activity in our hemisphere, particularly in the north. Following what must have been very productive meetings with the NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte, President Trump revealed that negotiations are now underway to secure U.S. strategic interests in Greenland, calling the territory a core national security priority. As a result of this breakthrough, President Trump suspended tariffs that were set to take effect February 1st in a show of good faith that will hopefully lead to more fruitful negotiations. Personally, I favor a vote of the people of Greenland. Let's have a national referendum and see whether they prefer independence over their current colonial status as a bastard stepchild for Denmark. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, which was a treat because Donald Trump went right into the belly of the beast and essentially told the global elitists that their vision for one world government and the new world order was DOA under Donald Trump's new Put America First agenda. Speaking at the forum, President Trump made the stakes clear. Greenland, he said, sits in a critical position between the United States, Russia, and China, yet remains dangerously underdefended. President Trump argued only the United States has the capability and the resolve to secure the Arctic in an era of growing geopolitical instability. President Trump also reminded the world that Democrats and globalist elites would like to forget this small part of history. During World War II, Denmark was unable to defend Greenland after it fell to Nazi Germany. The United States stepped in, built bases, defended the island, and prevented enemy powers from gaining a foothold in the Western Hemisphere. They handed Greenland back to the Danes after the war. It's also important to note that Presidents Harry S. Truman and President Dwight Eisenhower both expressed interest in taking control of Greenland during their presidency. So this is not a partisan issue. This is an American issue. Today, President Trump says Denmark has once again failed to meet its defense commitments, spending a fraction of what it promised to spend to protect the territory, while emphasizing that force is not on the table. In other words, President Trump isn't just going to invade and take control of Greenland, although it's conceivable based on the polls I've seen that the people of Greenland might actually like that. President Trump made it clear that he is very serious, however, about negotiations. Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will lead talks directly under President Trump's directions. President Trump's art of the deal negotiating tactics seem to be paying off. America will receive greater control over Greenland in a deal, I predict, that works out for all parties. Could Greenland ultimately become our 51st state? Well, it's entirely possible. But I think that there are a couple of Canadian provinces that are ahead of them. You see, under Canada's constitution, any province, which is like a state for our context, has the ability by a simple vote of the people to withdraw from the Canadian Federation and become independent. Saskatchewan and Alberta, both provinces in the West. Saskatchewan is both smaller and richer than Alberta. Richer when I speak of rare earth minerals such as potash, gas, and oil, is extraordinarily conservative. Alberta, quite conservative. These are the two most productive provinces in Canada, by the way. And the voters there are really kind of getting tired of paying for their fellow Canadians in the East who don't produce much, other than the fact that now public drug use is specifically legal in Canada. And if you visit any of their major cities, you will soon learn that most of the people you encounter seem to be stoned. The government there, the central government, has moved very aggressively to try to build a record, a log of every firearm in the country and who owns it and where exactly it is. Now, why would they be doing that? Why would a strong central government want to have that information? Unless, of course, someday they intend to to seize those guns. So there is an active movement in Saskatchewan where I understand they will collect the signatures to put the question on the ballot as to whether they should become independent from Canada. There's also a fledgling movement to do the same thing in Alberta. So they would have to obviously win that vote. The Canadian federal government, as it were, would have to allow their exit as prescribed by law. And then they could conceivably apply for membership in the United States, which has several levels of approval, including approval by a majority of the states, not entirely out of the country. So watch the Greenland situation very serious. I've talked to the president. I can tell you he is quite serious about gaining control over Greenland. Meanwhile, President Trump has launched a sweeping $5 billion lawsuit against J.P. Morgan Chase and its longtime CEO, Jamie Dimon, accusing the banking giant of politically motivated debanking in a case that puts weaponization of corporate power in the national spotlight. Thank God that President Trump has both the standing and the resources to fight this fight. I know literally hundreds, if not thousands, of Patriots, Trump supporters, who, because they chose to express their conservative or pro-Trump views on social media or in the public square, were not only censored by Facebook and Instagram and the old Twitter and TikTok, Snapchat, but also completely debanked. That's when your bank, your personal bank, say one that you've been doing business with for 20 plus years, suddenly comes to you and says, we can no longer service you as a bank. We're closing your accounts. No, we can't tell you why. And it is happened to many of Trump's supporters. Unfortunately for J.P. Morgan Chase, it happened to Donald Trump himself. And he refuses to take that sitting down. So on Thursday, he filed in Florida State Court a multi-million-dollar lawsuit alleging that J.P. Morgan abruptly terminated multiple Trump-related accounts in early 2021 after literally decades of doing business and running hundreds of millions of dollars through those banks in various transactions. They took this action against the president without warning, recourse, justification. They gave him no opportunity to appeal. Trump's attorney, Alejandro Brito, argues that the move violates the bank's own code of conduct, which pledges integrity, fairness, and ethical behavior. According to the complaint, the turning point came on February 19, 2021, when J.P. Morgan informed Trump and his affiliated companies that their accounts would be closed just 2 months later. No violations were cited, no remedies were offered, no appeal process was pointed out. The decision, the law firm claims, the Trump's control was final and indeed political. Trump's legal team claims J.P. Morgan acted not out of regulatory necessity, but out of woke ideological motivation, seeking to distance itself from Trump and his conservative views in a moment when corporate America was aggressively virtue signaling loyalty to the political left. The lawsuit warns that this conduct reflects a dangerous and growing trend of powerful financial institutions cutting Americans off from basic banking services based on solely political considerations. Even more troubling, the suit alleges that J.P. Morgan and Jamie Dimon placed Trump and his family and his businesses on a secret banking blacklist accessible to federally regulated institutions, effectively moving to freeze them out of the financial system entirely, despite full compliance with banking rules. In other words, J.P. Morgan Chase could not point to anything Donald Trump or his companies had done wrong in their banking. J.P. Morgan denies the allegations, claiming it does not close accounts for political reasons. Well, but we know otherwise. Why then did they close Trump's accounts? Perhaps they could answer that question. Trump's lawsuit accuses the bank of trade libel, deceptive trade practices, and breaching the basic standards of good faith. Trump is demanding a jury trial, smart, setting up a major legal showdown. It also shows that President Trump is not afraid to go toe-to-toe with influential, and in this case, very powerful banking institutions, something that no other president in our time has ever dared to do. This is why we elected him, I think, to make sure that the wealthy and the powerful are held to account when they refuse to put America first, when they violate the law or the Constitution. Frankly, kiss that Federal Reserve Chairman post you were angling for. Goodbye, Jamie Dimon. Don't think you're going to be getting it. It is amazing that, and people won't remember this, but President Donald Trump filed a civil suit that outlined the entire Russian collusion hoax in Miami. And it went to a Clinton-appointed judge named McCormick. And McCormick not only dismissed the case, but he tried to, or he fined President Trump and his lawyer, Alina Habba, $1 million apiece. Here's the problem. The classified documents released by Tulsi Gabbard prove that every single claim in that civil lawsuit filed in Florida that outlined the Russian collusion hoax was accurate. So I say it's time for Judge McCormick to retire from the bench. And if he refuses to retire from the bench, since his ruling is now proven to be false, and the president evidently has no appeal of this $1 million fine, well, then the Senate, frankly, the House, how I should say, should introduce articles of impeachment against Judge McCormick. I've checked the Constitution very carefully. I can't find the section that shows that the judicial branch is more powerful or has more authority than the legislative branch. It doesn't. So in this particular case, the judges claim that Trump's civil suit regarding Russian collusion was fanciful or was somehow false. We now know every word of it was true. That decision has to be overturned, or frankly, that judge should be examined in terms of their qualifications to sit on the bench. I thought at the time that Trump's filing the civil lawsuit was a very smart thing to do, even though I thought that there was a slim chance that he would prevail in court, depending on whether he got a fair-minded judge or whether he got a Clinton, Obama, Biden-appointed hack. But I thought it was important to memorialize, just for the record, what happened in Russian collusion and the act that every individual played: Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Susan Rice, James Comey, John Brennan, James Clapper, Andrew McCabe, Andrew Weissman, and the rest. Now go back and look at that civil lawsuit. It is all proven by the declassified documents released by Tulsi Gabbard. Clearly, that $1 million fine for President Trump and for his lawyer, Alina Habba, should be zeroed out, and that decision should be reversed. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to The Stone Zone. Wherever you don't go away, because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Former National Security Advisor John Bolton, you remember him, he's the guy with the walrus mustache. He had served under President George W. Bush, major cheerleader for the war on Iraq, which turned out to be a complete fraud that cost thousands of Americans their lives and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis their lives. He is now resurfaced on CNN this week to once again attack President Trump's newly announced Board of Peace. The Board of Peace is essentially the transitional organization that will attempt to bring peace to Gaza. And the comments of Bolton offer the familiar blend of alarmism, elitism, and sour grapes that come from the mustachioed warmonger's commentary in recent years. John Bolton never met a war he didn't like. At one point, he wanted to start a war with the North Koreans because they had shot down an unmanned drone. And when President Trump asked him how many people were killed, he said, well, none. So Trump says, so you want me to launch a nuclear attack on North Vietnam because they shot down a drone in which no one was killed? Yeah, that's about the size of it, said John Bolton. Appearing on The Source with Caitlin Collins, she used to work with me at Fox, before that at the Daily Caller. Talk about a switch hitter. Bolton derided the initiative as an embarrassment to the United States, scoffing at President Trump's willingness to engage leaders outside of Washington's preferred cabal. He specifically mocked the inclusion of one of the men I admire the most, the president of Hungary, Viktor Orban, who was elected in a Democrat election, and is a stout opponent of globalism and an acute critic of George Soros. In fact, there's an arrest warrant out for George Soros in Hungary. He cannot return to his native Hungary lest he be arrested. Bolton even suggested that President Trump's effort to negotiate ceasefires or to de-escalate global conflicts is all based on vanity rather than strategy. Well, the president is very proud of the fact that in 8 different hotspots around the world, for example, the long and particularly bloody war between Congo and Rwanda, President Trump was able to negotiate peace. But Bolton's criticisms say, to me, a lot more about his motivations than Donald Trump's foreign policy. Bolton has long championed the endless confrontation, regime change, permanent war footing, particularly in Ukraine and the Middle East, while dismissing any effort at diplomacy to get to peace as a weakness. John Bolton and people like him think that peace is never an objective and that war drums must always be beating. Kind of reminds me of Lindsey Graham. That guy starts foaming at the mouth when he thinks about war. He loves it so much. Of course, he himself will not be sent to serve. His claims that Trump is not focusing on real threats, I speak here of Bolton, is coming from the architect of the failed intervention that destabilized entire regions and drained America of its blood and treasure during the Iraq War. The American people have rejected that worldview, in my opinion. The people elected Donald Trump to break away from the foreign policy establishment that John Bolton represents. It is one that thrives on fear, escalation, and endless taxpayer-funded endless war. Bolton's outrage over Trump seeking dialogue, even with supposedly controversial leaders, reflects a deeper frustration. People like Bolton and the elites no longer set the agenda. The era of neocon dictating policy from think tanks and cable news studios is over. While John Bolton sneers from CNN, President Trump is pursuing results-oriented approaches focused on de-escalating and putting American interests at first. Calling peace embarrassing may well play in his elite cocktail parties that John Bolton attends, but it is wildly out of step with the American people who are tired of endless war and applaud this president's role as peacemaker. I'm Roger Stone. You've been listening to the Stone Zone. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.